They said this dog was too broken to save. Then she walked into his cage. He didn't look up when she opened the gate, didn't move, didn't growl, just stayed curled in the far corner of the kennel, like a shadow trying to disappear. The shelter staff warned her. That one? He's not ready. Maybe never will be. But Mara didn't flinch. She knelt, waited. What she didn't know was that the creature in front of her matted fur, ribs showing, eyes dim, wasn't just a rescue. He was a discarded military asset, a war dog who had seen too much, felt too little. His file was stamped with one word: terminated. But something inside her whispered, not yet. This is the story of Argo, a German shepherd, abandoned by the very system that trained him, who found his second life not through orders or commands, but through trust, and a woman who never raised her voice, only offered her hand. Keep watching, because what happens next isn't just healing, it's a quiet miracle. The gravel crunched under heavy boots as the convoy rolled to a halt in the pitch-dark countryside. A thick blanket of fog hung low over the abandoned property, obscuring the rusted wire fences and weather-beaten outbuildings. Wind whispered through the skeletal trees like the breath of something forgotten. At 2:43 a.m., a low voice broke the silence through the radio. Team Alpha, in position. Go dark. We breach in 10. Flashlights clicked off. Darkness swallowed them. They moved like shadows. Animal control, local officers, and 2 volunteers from a canine rescue unit, forming a crescent around the dilapidated structure once registered as a poultry farm. But that was years ago. Now rumors spoke of cages, crates, and whimpers in the night. The raid was swift. One kick to the back door and a rush of boots followed. The stench hit first urine, blood, mold, and fear, thick enough to gag. Then came the barking, shrill and hysterical, rising in waves as light spilled into darkness for the first time in years. Dozens of crates lined the walls, too small, too tight. Metal wires bent inward from where paws had clawed and mouths had gnawed. Dogs of every shape and size cowered or barked wildly as gloved hands opened cages and lifted them out one by one. Some bolted. Some collapsed. But one door, the last one at the farthest end of the hallway, refused to open. It wasn't locked, just stuck, like the room itself didn't want to give up its secret. Officer Diaz forced it open with a shoulder slam. The flashlight beam danced across broken tiles and an overturned bucket. The room was small, cold, silent, and in the farthest, darkest corner something moved, a shape, not barking, not growling, just trembling. He was barely more than a silhouette at first, folded in on himself like a dying star. His ribs jutted through a coat once meant to be proud. His ears were flattened so tight against his skull they seemed fused, and his eyes, they didn't blink. They didn't track the light. They stared at a space far away as if trying to disappear into it. "Holy shh!" Diaz murmured, stepping back involuntarily. The volunteer beside him knelt. "That's a German shepherd," she whispered. "Or what's left of one." They edged closer, slow and deliberate, speaking soft nonsense sounds. The dog didn't flinch. He didn't move, not even a twitch. One of the team members, Rebecca, a medic, spotted the faint tattoo behind his left ear. K97312. She exhaled sharply. "He's not just a stray," she whispered. "This one was trained. Look at the tattoo. He was in a program, military or police, they stared in silence. Even the barking from the other rooms seemed distant now. "Then what the hell is he doing here?" someone finally asked. No one had an answer. They brought a crate and gently guided the shepherd inside. He didn't resist. He didn't growl. He didn't even blink. His body was stone. His soul seemed gone. And as they carried him out, Rebecca said what the others were thinking, though no one wanted to be the first. This one was trained for something else. Outside, the dawn had just begun to tint the sky with the faintest smear of gray. The convoy lined up again, doors slamming shut, tires crunching gravel, and pulled away from the nightmare behind them. Inside the transport van, the rescued dogs whimpered, barked, and scratched in their crates. But not Argo. He lay on his side, still trembling, his eyes open but not seeing. The tag on his temporary collar read, "Unknown, male, Est 56YO, aggressive upon approach, severely traumatized." His crate was covered in a blanket for peace, but the trembling didn't stop. When they hit a pothole, he didn't react. When another dog yelped beside him, he didn't look. He wasn't hiding. He was gone. The gates to New Haven Recovery Center opened with a long groan, revealing a wide campus with cedar trees, old brick kennels, and a stillness that belonged to places where people try to make up for the pain the world has caused. As the rescue team unloaded dogs, the staff bustled with quiet urgency clipboards, intake sheets, gentle hands. One by one, the new arrivals were assessed, weighed, treated. But when they got to Argo, the rhythm faltered. They couldn't get a response, couldn't get a temperature reading, couldn't open his mouth without risking a seizure-level freeze-up. No fight, no flight, just shut down. The lead vet shook his head. "Isolation unit, immediate." They moved Argo into the kennel at the end of the west wing, far from the other dogs, in a room padded for trauma cases. No loud noises, no sudden movement, no forced interaction. Just quiet. He didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't blink when they checked. "We've seen PTSD in dogs before," whispered the junior tech to her colleague. "But this one..." The other only nodded, whispering back, "This one might not make it." From the shadows beyond the hallway, a new figure stood watching. A woman in her mid-30s, messy auburn bun, calm eyes with a storm behind them. She hadn't been there during the intake. She had just arrived. A volunteer badge hung from her lanyard. Her name was Mara Ellison. She didn't speak, didn't walk toward the kennel. She only looked. And when her eyes met the trembling mass in the back of the enclosure, she stayed. The van rolled to a slow halt, its tires crunching against the gravel lot of the New Haven Recovery Center. Morning had only just broken, painting the sky in streaks of silver and bruised purple. A bitter wind swept through the open yard, brushing past the faded wooden sign that read, "A place to begin again." The double doors opened with a groan. Inside, warm fluorescent lights flickered on, one by one, revealing a clean but modest facility. The center wasn't fancy. It didn't have sponsors or sleek commercials. What it had was time and a quiet, aching kind of hope. One by one, the rescued dogs were lifted out of the transport van, some barking, others cowering. Volunteers moved quickly but gently, checking tags, preparing medical intake stations, warming blankets, fresh water. Then came the last crate, still covered with a beige towel, still silent, still trembling. Officer Diaz lifted the edge of the towel and exhaled softly. "Still hasn't moved," he murmured. His voice was low, like he was afraid even sound might break the creature inside. Argo lay curled so tightly that his rib cage no longer looked canine. He resembled something folded in on itself, a collapsed lung, a wound that learned to breathe quietly so it wouldn't be noticed again. Two vet techs approached with a gurney, one of them holding a notepad. "This the shepherd?" Diaz nodded. "They say he was military bred, K97312. No confirmed deployment, probably failed the program early." He hesitated. "We found him in the back room. No barking, no resistance, just shut down." They opened the crate carefully, leaving it on the floor. Argo didn't move. No growl, no snarl, not even a glance. One of the techs knelt down slowly, hands extended. "Hey, buddy, you're safe now? You're okay. Can we help you out?" Nothing. They ended up lifting him, not fighting him, not restraining, but scooping him like a statue made of brittle ash. He didn't resist. He didn't yield. His muscles remained frozen, locked in some silent scream that hadn't ended yet. Once on the gurney, they wheeled him into the west wing, where the kennels were quieter, dimmer. This area was reserved for trauma cases, dogs too unstable for general housing. Argo was placed in Kennel 19, farthest from the others, with padded walls and soft lighting. His temporary tag was clipped on the gate. Name, unknown. Breed, GSD, M. Est. Age, 6. Notes, severe trauma. No eye contact. Unresponsive. Do not force handling. The vet tried to perform a basic intake exam. Checked the pads of his paws. Raw, worn. Teeth surprisingly intact but yellowed. Ears, no infection. Then the eyes, still wide open, still not blinking. They weren't wild. They weren't aggressive. They were just not there. Like looking through a glass window into a house where no one lived anymore. "He's gone somewhere far," one of the interns whispered. The lead vet shook his head. "We'll keep him on the standard wellness protocol: hydration, quiet observation, hand-feeding attempts twice daily. But," he paused, "don't expect interaction." Later that afternoon, a volunteer named Jenna brought a bowl of boiled chicken and broth, something easy, something comforting. She knelt outside Kennel 19, careful not to move too fast. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "I brought you something good." Argo didn't flinch, didn't sniff. The scent filled the space, rich and warm, but he stayed curled, unmoving, eyes half-lidded now, body drawn in like he was trying to disappear into the tile floor. She left the bowl and waited 10 minutes. Nothing. She tried again an hour later, then 3 hours. Not a single bite was touched. That evening, as the sun sank and long shadows crept through the facility's windows, Jenna found herself in the staff kitchen, staring into her tea. "I don't think he wants to come back," she said quietly to Michael, the center's director. Michael didn't answer right away. He just leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his weathered face drawn. "He was bred for service," he finally said, "raised in obedience, probably punished for disobedience, then discarded like equipment when he didn't measure up. I've seen this before." Jenna glanced up. "Will he make it?" Michael exhaled through his nose. "Some do, most don't. Not when they go that deep inside themselves, and not when it's been that long." That night the kennels were quiet. Most dogs were asleep, some dreaming, paws twitching against blankets. But in Kennel 19, Argo lay with his back to the world. His breath was shallow, chest barely rising. Not quite sleep, not quite awake. The bowl of chicken remained untouched. He hadn't barked once, hadn't whined, hadn't blinked, and somewhere in the stillness of that padded room, the weight of something unspoken pressed against the walls like grief. but quieter, like fear that had forgotten what it was afraid of. On the whiteboard outside his kennel, someone had scribbled in red marker beneath the intake notes, "May not be reachable." But the next morning someone new arrived, a woman with quiet eyes, a folded blanket under her arm, and the kind of stillness that didn't come from silence, but from surviving something. Mara Ellison. She walked past the barking, past the wagging tails and pleading eyes. She stopped at Kennel 19. She didn't speak. She didn't kneel. She didn't reach for the gate. She just stood there and watched, and saw something the others had missed. The morning sun was already climbing when Mara Ellison stepped out of her dusty sedan and shut the car door with a quiet click. The air at New Haven smelled like cedar mulch and wet earth, a sharp contrast to the scent of antiseptic and bleach that had haunted the last facility she volunteered at nearly 2 years ago. She stood there for a moment, taking in the gentle hum of the rescue center's routine, distant barks, a hose running, the creak of a kennel gate. Her fingers gripped the folded blanket tucked under her arm, the kind of grip not meant for warmth but for something to hold on to. She didn't want to be here. She needed to be here. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed low overhead. Volunteers came and went, some with leashes, others with clipboards. Names and faces blurred past her. Someone handed her a visitor pass. Another pointed toward the intake corridor. "You can start wherever feels right," they said. She nodded, but didn't move. Not yet. The West Wing hallway was quieter than the others, and colder, the kind of cold that settled into tile and silence. She walked slowly, her boots making soft contact with the floor. Kennels lined both sides, some empty, some occupied. A few dogs perked up as she passed, curious, hopeful. One gave a short bark. Another wagged a tail against metal. But Mara didn't stop. Her eyes were drawn forward, past the halfway mark, past the kennels with hopeful names scribbled on the whiteboards, Bailey, Lilo, Rocky, until she reached the last one. There was no name on this one, only Kennel 19, male, trauma case, do not approach without staff. She paused. Inside, the space felt suspended in time. The walls were padded. A soft blanket was folded near the back corner, untouched. The water bowl sat full. The food-boiled chicken, untouched, rested just outside reach. And there, curled so tightly he could have vanished, was a dog that looked more like a shadow than an animal. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't awake. He was elsewhere. Argo. No one had said his name aloud. Not yet. Not officially. But Mara recognized the look in his eyes. Not wild. Not vicious. Just emptied out. He didn't lift his head when she stopped, didn't even twitch, but his body, his whole frame was locked in tension, a silent brace, as if the air itself might strike him. Mara didn't speak. She didn't crouch. She didn't reach for the gate. She just stood there, still, steady, like the only stable thing in a world that had collapsed. Minutes passed. Other volunteers came and went down the hallway behind her, voices murmuring, laughter here and there. But for Mara, the world had narrowed to one fragile life curled in the corner of Kennel 19. Then, barely noticeable, an ear twitched, not in reaction to noise, not in fear, but in recognition. It was small, so small she almost doubted herself, but Mara had spent years with dogs like him, military dropouts, trauma cases, K-9s who were taught obedience without love, loyalty without safety. She'd seen the same dead stillness before, and she'd learned that the first moment of truth was never loud, it was always in the flicker. Michael Turner appeared beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. He glanced toward the kennel. "You picked a hard one." Mara didn't take her eyes off Argo. "I didn't pick anything," she murmured. "He's the one who stopped me." Michael let out a low breath. "We don't know much. Military program drop, probably rejected for fear reactivity. He was found in a compound near Calvert Creek, locked in the dark with no food for God knows how long. Since arriving, he hasn't eaten, hasn't barked, won't even blink when we enter." Mara nodded, still not moving. Michael hesitated, then added, "We're preparing an assessment form, just in case. This becomes a palliative case." She turned slightly. "You mean you're preparing to fail him?" He blinked. "That's not what I said." "No," she said, "but it's what you mean." They stood in silence. Then Michael's voice softened. "You haven't been around for a while. You okay?" Mara's lips curved, almost like a smile, but her eyes stayed fixed on the figure in the kennel. "I used to work with dogs like him, after combat deployments, after they came back wrong. One of them. I thought I could save him. I tried everything. And one night, he just stopped breathing. No illness, no wounds, just gave up." She paused. "I haven't sat in front of another dog like this since." Michael nodded once, slowly. "You don't have to start with him. There are easier ones." But Mara shook her head. "I didn't come here to do easy." The moment stretched again. Then, as if sensing her conviction, Argo blinked. Just once. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't even focused. But it was enough for Mara to exhale for the first time since she walked in. She crouched, slow and careful, until she was at eye level with the gate. She didn't speak, didn't reach. She simply folded her arms over her knees and stayed. Michael looked down at her. "What are you doing?" She answered without looking at him. "I'm waiting for him to believe I'm not going to hurt him." Michael shook his head, lips pursed. "You gonna sit here all day?" "If I have to." In Kennel 19, Argo didn't move, but his breathing changed just slightly. Less shallow, less ragged. Somewhere deep in the marrow of him, a new variable had entered the equation, a human who didn't demand anything, who didn't push, who didn't reach. And outside his kennel, Mara didn't blink either. She just stayed. The next morning, the hallway lights flickered on at 6:03 a.m., spilling a pale glow over the concrete floor of the West Wing. Most volunteers hadn't arrived yet. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain-soaked pine from the trees just outside the back fence. But Mara was already there. She moved down the hall with quiet purpose, a folded navy blanket tucked beneath her arm and a thermos of coffee clutched loosely in her hand. Her steps were soft, steady, almost reverent, like she was entering a chapel. When she reached Kennel 19, she stopped. Argo hadn't moved from where she'd last seen him. Same curled body, same wide, vacant eyes. But Mara didn't need a change in posture to recognize life. She could see it in the twitch of a muscle beneath fur, in the way one ear ever so slightly tilted when her boots stopped just outside his gate. She placed the thermos down beside her, unfolded the blanket on the floor, and slowly, almost ceremonially sat. Cross-legged, elbows on knees, hands open, no clipboard, no commands, no leash, just presence. The first hour passed in silence. A couple of early shift volunteers walked by, nodding politely, unsure what she was doing. By the second hour, the hallway had come alive with the sounds of barks, metal bowls clanging, and the scuffle of paws as morning routines began. A beagle named Cody was walked past her kennel, tail wagging furiously. Mara didn't move. She didn't greet the dogs. She didn't pet them through the bars. She just remained. Outside Kennel 19, she had become a fixture, still, grounded, undemanding. Inside, Argo stayed in his corner. But his ears were no longer fully pressed back, one tilted slightly in her direction. His breathing, shallow at first, had taken on a rhythm, not relaxed, but no longer frantic. He didn't lift his head, he didn't look at her, but he knew she was there, and Mara knew that was enough. Michael appeared mid-morning with a clipboard in hand and confusion written across his face. "You've been sitting there for 3 hours," he said, keeping his voice low but laced with a hint of concern. Mara nodded. He frowned. "He hasn't moved." "I know." "You haven't said anything." "I will." Michael shifted his weight, glancing at the trembling body inside the kennel. "Listen," he said, voice softening. "We've had other trauma cases before. Sometimes you need more than patience. Sometimes you need medication, intervention, behavior protocols. Otherwise..." He didn't finish the sentence. Mara finally looked up. Her voice was even, but it carried something old, worn but unshaken. "He's not a case. He's a soul. And right now the only thing he needs is someone who doesn't ask anything from him." Michael exhaled. "You plan on just sitting here all day?" Mara's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. Not yet. "Then I'll sit here all day." Time passed differently in that hallway. Staff members came and went. Feeding rounds happened. Kennels were cleaned. Papers were filed. Dogs barked. Tails thumped. Volunteers laughed in the background. But Mara stayed. At one point, Jenna, the same young tech who had first tried to hand-feed Argo, walked by with a tray of water bowls. She paused, puzzled. "He's still not moving?" "No," Mara said gently. Jenna tilted her head. "Then why are you still here?" Mara looked into Kennel 19. "Because someone has to be." Jenna's brow furrowed, then softened. She didn't say anything more, just placed the fresh bowl down outside Argo's gate and moved on. Around noon, a low murmur escaped Mara's lips, barely a whisper. "I'll be here." She didn't say it to anyone in particular, not to herself, not to the staff. She said it to him, to the dog who hadn't looked at her, to the dog who hadn't eaten or blinked or made a single sound in days, to the one who no longer trusted air, light, or the shape of a hand. And somehow, barely perceptible, a shift occurred. Not in action, not in noise, but in atmosphere. The tension in Argo's limbs, once so rigid it looked painful, began to ease by the smallest fraction. His front paw, which had been tucked tight beneath his chest, unfurled just slightly, reluctantly, as if his body had forgotten what it meant to stretch without punishment. He didn't raise his head. He didn't look at her. But his chest rose and fell, more deeply now. And Mara? She remained still, breathing with him, matching his rhythm. By 3 p.m., the hallway had quieted again. Afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, casting long shadows across the concrete. The blanket beneath her had gathered dust from the floor. Her back ached. Her legs were stiff. But she didn't move, because somewhere, deep in the broken scaffolding of this dog's soul, something had shifted. Maybe not healed, maybe not yet, but it had heard her. I'll be here. And for a creature who had learned that presence was a prelude to pain, that meant everything. It was the third day. The hallway of New Haven was quieter this morning. Rain tapped gently against the skylights above, soft as a lullaby. The scent of wet earth drifted in through the vents, mingling with the sterile smell of floor disinfectant and the faint musk of damp fur. Mara walked in, blanket under her arm, a small container in her coat pocket. Kennel 19 waited at the end of the corridor like always, the same dim lighting, the same peeling paint on the wall just beside the gate, the same dog, curled in the exact same corner like a piece of forgotten shadow. Except she saw it. Before she even sat down, she noticed it. His left ear twitched. It wasn't much. A reflex, barely noticeable to anyone passing by. But Mara was watching, not just looking, but watching, and that made all the difference. She didn't react, didn't speak, didn't praise. Instead, she quietly laid the blanket on the floor and lowered herself into a cross-legged sit, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees. She was becoming something of a quiet ritual here now, a strange silhouette always facing Kennel 19. Staff had stopped questioning her presence. Some still doubted, some admired. But all, in some way, had begun to notice that her stillness carried more weight than most interventions. An hour passed. Argo did not move, but Mara watched him the way someone might watch the wind in tall grass, subtle, shifting, never fully still. There it was again, the faintest flicker of an eye, just once, when a door at the far end of the hall creaked open. Not a look, not even a glance, but a flicker, a reaction, a sign that somewhere, in the wreckage of that mind, neurons were still firing. He wasn't gone, not fully. She leaned back just enough to slide her hand into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic container. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, was a single piece of boiled chicken, no salt, no seasoning. She had cooked it that morning, the way she'd once prepared meals for patients who couldn't stomach anything else. Pure, simple, honest. She didn't speak, didn't make eye contact. She simply reached forward and placed the small piece just inside the kennel door, far enough away to not intrude, but close enough for him to choose. And then, quietly, she pulled her hand back and resumed her seat. Time stretched. Argo didn't move. He didn't sniff, didn't flinch. His breathing remained steady, body curled tightly like a defense mechanism, fossilized into instinct. A silence passed between them, not empty, but pregnant with something deeper, a kind of question, a kind of test, a kind of hope. After a while, Mara slowly stood. Her knees popped. Her lower back ached, but she didn't show it. Pain had its place, and it wasn't more important than what was happening here. She gathered her blanket and thermos, gave one last look toward the kennel without speaking, and turned away. Before she left, she glanced at the staff logbook near the reception desk and quietly wrote, Day 3. He heard the rain. Ear flicker. Left piece of chicken. No contact. Still. Here. M.E. That night, long after the center had closed and the last light was dimmed, a small security camera mounted in the corner of the hallway captured a moment no one else would see. At 2:11 a.m., Argo stirred. Not much, just a slow, uncertain shift of muscle. One paw slid forward, his nose lifted from his front leg, hovering just above the floor. Then, hesitantly, like a memory trying to return, he inched closer to the kennel door. He didn't eat the chicken, but he smelled it. Long, deep. 2 breaths. Then 3. And then he curled back into his corner, still trembling, still bruised, but not as tightly as before. The next morning, when Mara arrived, the chicken was untouched, but it had moved slightly, barely noticeable, except to someone who knew exactly where she'd placed it the day before. She didn't react, didn't speak, just sat, like always. Blanket, thermos, silence. But inside, something shifted. Because sometimes healing didn't start with a leap or even a step. Sometimes it started with a single breath, with a decision to smell instead of shut down, with a muscle unclenching in the dark. Back in the staff room, Jenna read Mara's updated log entry and blinked. 2:11 a.m. He smelled the chicken. M.E. She looked up and whispered, almost to herself, "He's still in there." The morning light filtered through the high windows, soft and amber, washing the linoleum floor of New Haven in a gentle warmth that belied the cold words about to come. Mara had just finished her usual sit. Argo hadn't moved, but the chicken this time was gone. She knew better than to celebrate. Hope was delicate, and premature joy could shatter it like glass. She was folding her blanket when she heard the footsteps behind her. Measured, heavy, familiar. "Got a minute?" It was Michael. The director of New Haven Recovery wasn't a cruel man, but he was a realist, grounded in stats, scars, and the weight of too many dogs who never came back from whatever darkness they'd seen. His beard was peppered with gray, his hands calloused, and his eyes, though kind, carried caution like a second lens. Mara nodded. They stepped into the small conference room near the break lounge. A coffee pot sputtered on the counter, forgotten. Outside, Argo's kennel remained quiet, like a shadow too tired to move. Michael crossed his arms. "Mara," he said gently, "I've seen the logs. You've been here every day for 2 weeks. She didn't answer, just met his eyes, waiting. He sighed and pulled out a chair. "Look, I get it, I really do. But I need you to understand something about that dog." She said nothing, just waited. Michael leaned forward, voice low but firm. "He's not just shut down. He's not just scared. That dog was pulled from an illegal military-bred kennel in Arizona. Former contractor property. No real records, just scars. We ran his chip. You know what came up?" She blinked. "What?" "Asset number 37K. Deemed non-deployable. Removed from program at 10 months. Rejected for aggression and unresponsiveness. Recommendation, humane disposal." He paused. They threw him away before he even had a chance. A silence hung between them. Then, with a breath, "He's a war reject, Mara. They couldn't train it out of him. They gave up, and they're trained not to." She nodded slowly, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm not trying to be cold," Michael added, "but dogs like him, they don't come back. You keep sitting there day after day, and I'm worried you're going to burn out." Mara looked down for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. "I know what he is." Michael tilted his head. "Do you?" She looked up then, not defensive, but open in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "I worked with war dogs," she said, "years ago. Before I moved upstate, before I stopped." Michael's brow furrowed slightly. "I didn't know that." No one here does, she said quietly. I don't talk about it. He didn't press, just waited. I was part of a reintegration unit, she continued. We were the ones who helped military canines transition after discharge if they were lucky enough to make it out alive. Her voice faltered, but only slightly. A pause, then, there was this one dog, Tavor, Belgian Malinois, light-tan coat, scar across his right eye. He was my assignment for 8 weeks. Didn't eat for the first 5 days, didn't sleep for 10. But he came around. Michael listened, arms now resting on the table. We got to a place where he'd nudge my hand when I entered, Mara said, her eyes distant, where he'd curl up beside me in the grass on good days. He even played fetch once. Just once. She swallowed hard. He was scheduled to be adopted by his former handler. But before the transport, someone left his gate unlocked. Her voice cracked, barely audible. He bolted, straight into traffic. Didn't make it 2 blocks. A silence pressed against the walls. Michael exhaled. I'm sorry. I still dream of him, she whispered. Still wonder if I could have done something more. Her eyes moved to the window where the corridor turned back toward Kennel 19. I couldn't save him, she said. Maybe I can sit long enough for this one. Michael said nothing for a while. Just watched her. Then slowly he stood. You're not just sitting, Mara, he said. You're bleeding out, quietly. She smiled. Not with her mouth, but with her eyes. That's the only way some souls know how to be reached. He nodded, the corners of his mouth tugging with resignation. Just don't lose yourself in his cage, all right? I already know the way out, she said. As Michael walked away, Mara remained seated for a moment longer, feeling the weight of memory settle against her ribs like an old bruise. Then she rose, blanket in hand, and walked back toward the shadow at the end of the corridor. By day 4, the staff had stopped checking in. They had quietly accepted that Mara Ellison was going to be there, blanket folded neatly, sitting cross-legged on the cold linoleum floor outside Kennel 19. She didn't knock, didn't speak, didn't even move much. She simply was. To most of them, it looked like a woman wasting her time. To Argo, it was something else entirely. The morning light that filtered through the windows was softer than usual, pale gold against the glass. A stillness blanketed the center, broken only by the distant clink of metal bowls and the occasional bark echoing down the corridor. But Kennel 19 remained silent. Mara sat as she always did, hands relaxed in her lap, back gently leaning against the opposite wall. No phone, no distractions, just a quiet presence. In front of her, on the floor between the bars and her folded knees, lay a small piece of boiled chicken. No commands, no coaxing, just offering. Argo lay curled in the farthest corner of the kennel, still, statuesque. His coat, once meant to gleam like old bronze, was dull, frayed at the edges, and matted in places where stressed chewing had taken its toll. His eyes, when open, were a flat, ancient amber, watching, listening, waiting. For 3 days the chicken had gone untouched, though Mara noticed it had always moved slightly when she returned the next morning. No camera, no confirmation, just a hunch, a feeling. But today, something was different. The hum in the air, the pause between moments. The way Argo's breathing wasn't quite as shallow. Mara remained still, 10 minutes passed, then 20, and then, out of the silence, a flicker, the faintest twitch in Argo's ears. He was awake and alert. Mara didn't change her posture, but her heart picked up pace, a rhythm she'd learned to suppress long ago. 1 breath, 2, let it settle, let the moment speak. Inside the kennel, Argo's head lifted not fully, but enough to break the symmetry of his curled position. His body remained grounded, but his nostrils flared. He had scented the chicken. And for the first time, he didn't just scent it. He reacted. His body stretched slightly, front paws extending like a silent crawl. His rib cage lifted off the ground, barely, as he pressed his weight forward inch by inch. Mara didn't move. She didn't even blink. The air between them felt like stretched glass, fragile, vibrating with the possibility of shatter. Argo paused, eyes flicking to her. Not fear, not aggression, just calculation. A survivor measuring risk. Mara's voice, when it came, was not much louder than a breath. "It's yours if you want it." That was all. No baby talk. No clicker cues. Just presence. And Argo crept forward again. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't even confident. His movement was jittery, shoulders tense, every step slow and uneven, as though his body had forgotten how to approach anything without flinching. He was still a ghost of what he had been, or what he was meant to be. But ghosts don't move toward the living, and Argo was moving, centimeter by centimeter. He closed the distance, first to the halfway mark, then a pause, then closer. Mara could hear her own pulse loud in her ears. She breathed through it, kept her gaze soft, unfixed. And then he reached it. The chicken was just within his grasp. His nose touched it, then retreated. A long, hanging moment passed, and then he lunged. Not with violence, but urgency grabbed the morsel and darted back to his corner like a prisoner returning to his cell. The chicken disappeared into the dark space between his paws. He didn't make eye contact, but he had chosen, voluntarily, silently. He had stepped into the invisible space between himself and the world and taken something that came from human hands. Mara didn't celebrate. She didn't clap or exclaim. She simply smiled, small and inward, and exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. From the observation window farther down the corridor, Michael stood watching, arms crossed. He said nothing, just nodded to himself once, then walked away. Back in the kennel, Argo licked the floor slowly, cleaning up the last trace of chicken. And for the first time, his eyes didn't go blank. They followed Mara, briefly, and then closed, not from shutdown, but from rest. A fragile first crack in the armor. A beginning. The hallway was quiet again. Same time. Same light slanting across the pale tile floor. But something in the air had changed, subtle as the hush before dawn. Mara Ellison felt it as soon as she stepped into the corridor. Kennel 19 was no longer just a cage at the end of a cold hallway. It was becoming a conversation. She moved with the same careful rhythm. No perfume, no jangling keys, shoes soft-soled, to avoid the sharp tap that sent some dogs into themselves. Her blanket was folded neatly under her arm, a small thermos in her hand. She passed the check-in desk without a word. The staff had stopped commenting by now. They'd seen the video. Argo creeping forward, tense as a violin string, snatching the boiled chicken and retreating like a whisper of smoke. No one expected it to happen again, but Mara did. And this morning, so did he. He was already awake when she arrived, not flat or curled into himself like before, but upright, chest low to the ground, front legs spread in a crouch, alert, not hostile, waiting. Mara sat down cross-legged outside the kennel, just like always. She didn't greet him. Instead, she unscrewed the lid of the thermos and let the scent drift. The aroma of warm broth and shredded chicken slowly filled the air, clean, simple, honest. She placed a small piece on the towel that marked the halfway point between them. Then she leaned back, hands resting on her knees, and waited. The minutes passed like mist, soft, without edges. Then came the sound. Not a bark, not a whine, just the scrape of claw over floor. Argo had moved. He emerged slowly, like a creature who had forgotten how light worked on fur. This time, his paws didn't hesitate at the threshold of shadow. He moved forward, not confidently, but with purpose. The tremble was still in his limbs. The trauma hadn't vanished overnight, but something new lived there now, too. Curiosity. He crossed the distance between them with less startle, more intention. His shoulders rolled with wariness, but his steps didn't falter. He sniffed the chicken first, then looked down at it. And then, before reaching down to grab it, he looked up, straight at her. Mara hadn't expected it. Not that day, not that soon. She had prepared herself for months, possibly years of quiet, of waiting in silence while the shattered dog before her slowly stitched himself back together. But there it was. 2 seconds. That was all. His eyes found hers and held. No flinch, no aggression, no panic. Only presence. A raw, haunted knowing in his gaze, like staring into the remnants of a house that had once held laughter but now stood in ruins. Amber eyes, dulled by God knows what he'd been through, suddenly held light again. A glint, a spark, a ghost remembering its name. Mara didn't breathe. She couldn't, because something cracked inside her at that moment, not in fear, but in recognition. She knew that look. She had seen it once before, in another pair of eyes, in another kennel, years ago, just before the bombs, just before she lost the only dog she had ever called her partner. Argo blinked, then reached down and took the chicken gently into his mouth. No retreat. He stayed where he was, chewing slowly, head down, guarded but no longer distant. And Mara, still frozen in her quiet posture, felt warmth slide down her cheek. A tear, then another. No sobs, no tremble, just a quiet, sacred unraveling, the kind that comes not from grief but from grace. Because in those 2 seconds of eye contact, something had happened that no X-ray, no sedative, no training manual could create. Consent. Argo had seen her, chosen to look, chosen to hold, chosen not to run. It was a thread, thin, trembling, barely there. But in the world of trauma, where most threads are torn before they're even tied, that tiny thread was everything. Mara pressed the back of her hand to her face. A breath caught in her throat. "Hi," she whispered, so soft it wasn't for him to hear, but for the space between them. He flicked an ear. That was all, but it was enough. Back at the reception window, one of the younger vet techs, Riley, watched with wide eyes and a hand over her mouth. "Did you see that?" she whispered to no one in particular. He looked at her. Michael, standing beside her, didn't answer right away. He just studied the moment in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "That," he said, "wasn't just eye contact." Riley looked at him. "Then what was it?" Michael kept his eyes on Argo. Hope, he said. That was hope finding its way back in. There are moments so quiet, so delicately suspended between breath and heartbeat, that even the air seems to lean in to listen. This was one of them. For 6 days, Mara had sat outside Kennel 19, not pushing, not coaxing, just existing, present in a way that didn't demand anything. No leashes, no commands, no expectations. Only stillness, offered like an open hand. But today, the stillness held something more, a question, a seed. The moment yesterday, the 2 seconds of eye contact hadn't broken the silence. It had deepened it, shifted it from absence into intimacy. And intimacy, Mara knew, always began with a name. So, on day 7, as she unfolded the same blanket and took her place by the kennel bars, she looked at him, not directly, but with the soft reverence of someone addressing a soul more than a body. And then she whispered, "Argo." The sound was barely there, not even a full breath, just a syllable slid through silence. His ear twitched. It was the only movement he made for an hour. But Mara had seen it. It wasn't a flinch, not like the others, not the muscle memory recoils of a dog conditioned to expect cruelty at the sound of a voice. No, this was different, subtle, almost responsive. She waited 10 minutes, just sitting, eyes soft, body still. Then she said it again. "Argo?" No commands, no sweet voice, just steady presence, and that name spoken like a prayer left at a doorstep. She didn't know if it was his real name. No one at New Haven did. His paperwork had arrived blank in that box. No call sign, no tattooed number, just a broken body and a long list of traumas that made some staff avoid the kennel entirely. But something about him, his bearing, the way he scanned a room before entering, the micro-adjustments of his breath when someone new entered his radius told Mara he hadn't been a pet. He'd been a soldier, and soldiers often came with names they were never allowed to forget. That night, just before she left, she stood slowly. Her knees cracked as she rose age, and the cold floor conspiring against her bones. She gathered her blanket, capped her thermos, and turned back to the kennel one last time. His eyes were open, watching her through the bars. Still no movement, still no sound. But the watching was different now. She smiled, the corners of her eyes wrinkling gently, and offered a whisper so soft it could have been mistaken for wind slipping under the door. "Good night, Argo." She left. The next morning he was already waiting. He didn't stand, didn't move toward her, but he didn't hide in the corner either. He stayed in the open, still, silent, but watching. Mara took her seat without a word, set down a piece of chicken, sat back, let the room breathe. 20 minutes in, she whispered it again. "Argo." His left ear twitched. She said nothing else. Just returned to silence, let it stretch out like warm sunlight over winter ground. Another hour passed. She stood to leave. "Good night, Argo." His head tilted just slightly, as if hearing the name echo from some dark hallway of memory. And maybe stepping toward it. This became their ritual, day after day. She never rushed it, never made the name a lure or a trick, never used it to bait him closer. She let the word be what it should be, an offering, a recognition, a promise that someone in this place saw him as more than a caution file in the vet's database. She wasn't naming him. She was remembering him. By week 2, his ears responded every time. Not dramatically, not in leaps or wags, but like wires once frayed, now beginning to carry current again. Michael noticed. So did Riley. But no one said anything aloud. It was as if the hallway had entered some kind of hush, a collective reverence for whatever was unfolding between the silent woman and the war-wrecked dog in Kennel 19. On the 9th night, as Mara whispered her usual, "Good night, Argo," a noise reached her ears just as she turned to leave. Soft, breath-like, not a whine, not a bark, just breath. Exhaled, deliberate, timed with her own. She didn't turn around. She let the sound settle behind her like a benediction. Outside, the sky had turned that deep indigo of early spring nights. Stars blinked into being, and behind the glass window of Kennel 19, a dog who had once curled into the silence of war now stared into the dark ears tilted, name remembered. It happened on a Thursday. Mara had arrived early, as always. The halls were quiet, too early for feeding, too early for volunteers still finding their coffee. Just her, the stillness, and Kennel 19. Argo had been waiting. Not in the open, not quite, but no longer buried deep in the shadows either. He was lying in that half-sphinx pose near the front of his kennel, not asleep, not fully guarded. Somewhere in between. When Mara laid the boiled chicken near the bars, he didn't flinch. He even sniffed the air once. Not much, but enough to make her chest fill with a quiet kind of hope. He'd come so far. Not in steps you could see if you walked by casually, but in the small language only those who watched with their whole soul would notice. The way his breathing no longer hitched when someone entered the hall. The way he didn't automatically retreat when her hand brushed the floor too close. And now, this morning, the way his eyes haunted still. Yes, but softer stayed on her without folding into terror. It was all unraveling into something gentle, until the sound. A sudden, unholy clang, a steel kennel gate slamming shut at the far end of the corridor. It was nothing out of the ordinary, just a prospective adopter who'd gotten too excited or too impatient. A door unlatched, closed with careless force. But to Argo, it was a bomb. His body recoiled instantly, every muscle snapping into terror. He scrambled backward, claws screeching against concrete, until his frame collapsed into the deepest corner of the kennel. Eyes bulging, limbs convulsing, his mouth open but silent, as if he'd forgotten how to make noise. Mara froze. She didn't move, didn't speak. She knew better. Instead, she watched with a kind of helpless ache as Argo, this soul, who had just begun to lean into light, was pulled back into whatever darkness had made him. He was shaking, not the soft tremble of uncertainty. No, this was panic, primal, raw, violent in its stillness. His body curled tighter and tighter into itself, spine curved like a drawn bow, muscles twitching without rhythm. His eyes no longer tracked her. They were somewhere else, entirely locked in the past, in some hot, booming memory where death had worn boots and barked orders. Mara's hands tightened into fists on her lap. Not in anger, in sorrow. She didn't say his name. Not now. Not while the world inside his mind was on fire. She just sat, waited, let the silence speak. Across the hallway, Riley had peeked around the corner, sensing something wrong. But Mara met her eyes and gave the tiniest shake of her head. This was not a time for intervention, it was a time for endurance. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Argo didn't move. His breath came in short, frantic bursts, nostrils flaring, ribs barely rising before collapsing again. Mara, still sitting cross-legged on the cold floor, whispered not a name but a sentence. "You're safe." No reaction. "I'm still here." Still nothing. She watched as a single line of drool stretched from Argo's clenched jaw to the concrete, trembled, and fell. It struck the floor like a silent confession. She fought back tears, not because of the setback, but because of how clear it was now. Healing was not a staircase. It was a spiral, one that sometimes dipped backward before it could circle higher. Argo had touched light, and now he was drowning again. But that didn't mean the light had been false. It only meant the wounds were deeper than anyone could see. By the time staff arrived with feeding carts and routine chatter, Argo had stopped shaking, but remained frozen in the corner. He wouldn't meet anyone's gaze, wouldn't sniff food, wouldn't twitch an ear when Mara whispered his name as she left. It was as if he'd erased the progress himself, ashamed, perhaps, of the collapse. But Mara knew better. She'd seen this before. The veterans she used to work with, the ones who could go weeks smiling and then crumble at the sound of a tire backfiring. Pain never left in a straight line. It waited, and sometimes it slammed back in through the door without knocking. That night, Mara wrote in her journal, "Day 11, setback, severe. He's still in there, I know it. He heard the bomb, not the gate. Tomorrow I'll sit again. I don't need him to come back all at once. I just need him to believe I won't leave when he disappears." The hallway looked longer that morning. Maybe it was the rain on the skylight, soft and gray, making the concrete gleam cold. Or maybe it was the silence, not the usual stillness of early hours, but something heavier. A hush laced with hesitation. Mara stood at the edge of the corridor, hands still in her coat pockets, unmoving. She'd barely slept. All night she had wrestled with the image of Argo curled up in the corner, his body folded in on itself like a house with no windows. She'd replayed the clang of the gate, the ripple of fear that had collapsed him inward, and the question had followed her home. Should she go back? Not to the center, she would, of course, but to him. Was it time to give him space? To step away before her presence became another pressure? Mara had worked with trauma long enough to know that even love, well-intentioned, patient love could become a weight if offered at the wrong moment. She stared down the hallway. Kennel 19 sat near the far end. The chicken wasn't touched. Not surprising. His water bowl was tipped on its side, and the blanket she had folded in the corner was now crumpled and pushed against the back wall like he had tried to erase every trace she'd left. Her breath caught. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is when he gives up. And maybe, she thought, maybe I should let him. But then a memory stirred. A different hallway, different dog, years ago, also curled in fear, also unreachable, one she hadn't been able to save, one whose story still clung to the pages of her journal and the corners of her silence. Her fingers tightened around something small in her pocket, a ribbon, faded blue. She exhaled and walked. No chicken today, no whispered name, no gestures, just steps, just silence. She reached Kennel 19 and didn't say a word. She folded herself slowly down into her usual spot, cross-legged on the floor, knees stiff, palms on her lap. She didn't even look at him directly. No expectations. Only presence. Time passed. First 10 minutes, then 30, then a full hour. The hallway came alive around her. Feeding carts rolled by. A pair of interns whispered nervously about the files they'd forgotten. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and then fell quiet. Mara stayed, like a stone in the river. Still, steady. Letting everything wash past. Inside the kennel, Argo didn't move. He hadn't stirred since she sat. But Mara didn't shift either. Her joints began to ache. Her ankle buzzed with pins and needles. Her lips were dry. Still she stayed, not for progress, not for results, just for him. Because even in the shadow of his collapse, she believed he was still trying, not with movement, not with sound, but with endurance. 2 hours passed, then 3. By now, most staff had stopped paying attention to her. Mara was part of the scenery. Just another quiet figure in the story of a dog too broken to be reached. And then it happened. So small, she almost missed it. A shift in light, a flicker of motion. Mara didn't move, but her heart did. In the farthest corner of the kennel, barely visible between the bars, a single brown eye was watching her. Argo hadn't moved his body, but he had lifted his head ever so slightly. His ear twitched, once, then again. And then, like someone peeking out from behind a curtain, his head inched forward. It wasn't a step. It wasn't a reach. It was a question. "Are you still there?" Mara didn't blink. She didn't speak, but she let the answer fill the air between them. "Yes, I'm still here." He didn't move again. And yet he had. The look wasn't long, barely 10 seconds before he tucked his head back down, retreating into whatever shadows still lived inside him. But the flicker had come from within. He had chosen to look. After everything. After the panic, the collapse, the hours spent folded in a knot of terror. He had chosen to see if she was still there. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, let the weight of it settle in her chest. Not joy, not even hope yet, but recognition. She whispered nothing, only sat, knees aching, back stiff, breath steady. When she finally rose, hours later, quietly, slowly, she didn't say goodbye, didn't reach for the gate or call his name. But just before she turned the corner of the hallway, she looked back once. He was watching, still curled, but watching. The hallway was quiet again, but this time, it wasn't the absence of sound that filled it. It was something heavier like grief that hadn't found its voice yet. Mara walked slower today, not from fatigue, though the exhaustion from the past week clung to her spine, not from fear either, but from something harder to name, expectations opposite. Not doubt exactly, just the quiet ache that settles in when you've chosen to care without needing it to pay you back. She passed the row of kennels like always. Some dogs perked up as she walked by, tails wagging, ears high, a few barking soft invitations. She gave them each a glance, a nod, but her path was already drawn. Kennel 19. Same concrete floor, same dull overhead bulb casting a lazy circle of light across the space. And there he was, Argo, curled tightly in the corner again, not shaking this time, but still, too still, as if he were trying to disappear into himself. The moment she appeared in his periphery, he didn't flinch, didn't retreat. But he didn't look at her either. His eyes were half-lidded, breathing shallow, withdrawn but not gone. Mara didn't bring the chicken today. She didn't need to. That step had passed. And today wasn't about movement or reward. It was about showing up when progress felt invisible. She lowered herself cross-legged beside his kennel, knees stiff from yesterday, the backs of her calves already protesting. Her back leaned gently against the wall behind her. No words, no whispers, just being. The center around her pulsed with routine. Carts wheeled by, doors clicked open and shut. A young volunteer laughed somewhere near reception, too loud but well-meaning. None of it reached Mara, and none of it stirred Argo. It was the first time she had seen him like this, neither curious nor terrified. Just removed, like a light dimmed low behind frosted glass. Hours passed. She didn't track them, but her body did. Her thighs ached, and her spine began to curve. A headache pressed lightly against her temples, born from stale air and too little motion. Still, she stayed. Love without reward. She had read about it, had taught it, even in classrooms where young therapists in training scribbled notes about unconditional positive regard. But this was the field work no textbook explained. What it means to sit beside someone silent, wounded, unreachable, and not need them to reach back. What it costs to keep loving when every signal says go. Across the kennel, Argo's eyes fluttered once. Not a blink, just a twitch beneath the surface. Mara noticed, but didn't react. He didn't lift his head, didn't shift his body. But he hadn't turned away either. Stillness wasn't absence, not this time. It was presence without performance, and maybe that was the deeper test not for him, but for her. Could she sit here, day after day, not for the moment he might come closer, but simply because he deserved someone who stayed? The hours crept on. Her legs lost sensation. A fine tremble set into her fingers. Her coffee from earlier was long gone cold. She hadn't spoken in nearly 3 hours. But something in her spirit felt oddly anchored, not triumphant, just grounded. Eventually the hallway dimmed into afternoon. Shadows stretched, and the light turned amber against the concrete walls. Mara stood, finally slow, deliberate, careful not to startle him. Her knees cracked slightly under her. Still, Argo didn't look. She hesitated, wanted for a moment to say something, to mark the effort, the choice, the small heartbeat of quiet faith that had pulsed through the day. But she didn't. No whispered name, no hopeful cue, just a soft exhale. And then, as she turned, she heard it. Not a bark, not a whimper, just the softest shuffle behind her. She froze, waited, turned slowly. Argo hadn't risen, but his body had uncoiled slightly. His front paws no longer tucked under his chest but stretched forward, toes splayed, his face still lowered but not pressed to the ground. And his eyes followed her, just for a moment, just long enough. Mara didn't smile, didn't cry. She just nodded and left in silence. The morning air held a bite to it, sharp, still clinging to winter. It seeped through the seams of the center's walls and settled over the linoleum like a sigh. Most would call it an ordinary Thursday. For Mara, it felt like a threshold. She paused before the kennel. No words, just the slow rhythm of her breathing as she crouched, knees creaking slightly, a practiced motion now. Across the bars, Argo lay awake. He didn't startle. He didn't turn away. His eyes tracked her with that same guarded awareness, one foot still in the world of threat, the other tentatively testing the ground of maybe. Mara didn't bring the blanket today, nor the usual plastic dish slid gently inside like a peace treaty. Today was different. She unwrapped the chicken slowly, still warm from her pocket thermos, soft and shredded, boiled plain. Argo's ears twitched. Not forward, not eager, but listening. Mara didn't speak. She simply extended her hand through the side of the gate, fingers open, palm up, a small mound of chicken resting like a question mark. Time stretched. 1 minute, 2, 5. Her arm trembled, not from fear, but strain. The muscles at her shoulder began to burn, but she didn't lower it. Stillness had taught her something. Movement wasn't always progress, and waiting wasn't always passive. Argo remained frozen, his body low to the ground, but his nose lifted just slightly. A flicker of scent, a faint, involuntary pull. He stayed like that for what felt like an hour, sniffing the air, head just off the ground, frozen in that space between instinct and fear. Then, one paw moved, barely an inch, then another, and then slowly, painfully slow, he began to creep forward. Each inch was a negotiation, each movement a bargain struck between hunger and history. Mara didn't breathe, not deeply, not enough to break the moment. Her arm, now shaking visibly, remained extended still and low. And then he was there, close enough for her to feel his breath against her fingertips, hot and uneven. His eyes flicked to hers, once brief, guarded, full of ghosts, and then, soft as rain, he took the chicken. No snatch, no retreat. His teeth grazed her palm with a feather's weight, careful and controlled. And then he stayed. Didn't bolt, didn't flinch. He simply sat there, jaw working, eyes lowered, as if the act itself had worn him out. Mara lowered her hand, finally resting it against her thigh. It trembled, still half from adrenaline, half from awe. A part of her wanted to speak, to say something gentle, or victorious, or even grateful. But this wasn't a moment for words. This was sacred ground. And so, she just sat. Argo didn't move away. He didn't press closer either. But he stayed, right there, half a foot between them. Not absence, not threat, not trust either, but something beginning. Outside, the wind shifted. Someone laughed in the lobby. A phone rang in the distant office, but in Kennel 19, time stood still. She didn't stay much longer that day. She didn't need to. When she rose, Mara did something she hadn't done before. She reached through the bars. Not fast, not forward, just a simple closing of space, and laid her palm, empty now, against the cool cement. Argo's eyes followed it. She whispered just once, like the word itself had earned the right to exist. "Good boy." Then she walked away. No backward glance, no dramatics. Just a quiet exit from a quiet moment. Later that evening, after most of the center had gone quiet, one of the janitors passed by Kennel 19. He paused for a second, frowning, because the dog inside, who'd once cowered at the very sound of footsteps, wasn't pressed into the back corner. He was lying near the gate, not touching it, not relaxed, but closer. And in his posture, a quiet echo of something ancient, not obedience, not training, but choice. The mornings were beginning to hold a hint of spring soft light filtering through the old windows, catching dust in the air like floating ash from an invisible fire. But in Kennel 19, it was not the season that shifted. It was something quieter, something harder to name. Mara sat again, cross-legged, calm, a little ache in her spine now from so many days on the cold concrete, but she didn't adjust. She never did not when Argo was near. And this morning he was near. Not curled in the back corner like before, not even halfway between. He was there, right there, only a breath of space separating her knees from the edge of his hesitation. He hadn't taken food from her today. He didn't need to. That wasn't the ritual anymore. Today, it was about presence, about the act of simply being, together. No sound, no expectation, just two hearts, trying to remember what safety felt like. Mara let her fingers rest gently on the floor, palm down, loose, not reaching, just there, like always. And then, soft as breath, lighter than air. She felt him, not his paw, not his weight, his whiskers, just the barest touch of them, brushing against her knuckles. A single strand at first, then another. She froze, not out of fear, but reverence, like the brush of wind across a prayer flag, or the first drop of rain on scorched earth. Her lungs tightened, caught in that fragile moment between miracle and movement. She closed her eyes, not to hide, but to keep from weeping, because tears, right now, felt like thunder. And any sound, any shift, might undo this fragile trust he'd laid, trembling, at her feet. Argo didn't bolt. He didn't growl, didn't shrink back. He just stood there, muzzle low, still unsure whether this was contact or accident. But he stayed, and in his staying he spoke not with sound, but with the language only the broken and the patient understand. I'm not ready to be held, but I'm not afraid of your hand. That alone was enough to make Mara want to crumble. But she didn't. She inhaled slowly, through her nose, let the air fill the hollow behind her ribs, and exhaled as if releasing every last ounce of pressure. He inched back then barely, just enough to reclaim a whisper of space. His tail didn't wag. His eyes didn't soften, but he didn't disappear into himself. And that was sacred. Outside, a staff member passed by and paused briefly. All they saw was a woman sitting beside a dog who didn't even look at her. To them, it looked like nothing. To Mara, it was everything. Because in the world of trauma, contact without collapse is its own kind of triumph. Later that night, as she packed up to leave, Mara sat for an extra moment just beyond the kennel. The hallway lights had dimmed. The hum of the vending machine down the corridor provided the only sound. She didn't speak to him, didn't try to recreate what had happened earlier. Instead, as she rose to her feet, she did something simple, something human. She turned her body sideways, not facing him full on, and whispered, "Sleep well, Argo." The name again. That soft syllable she'd worn into the walls over days of repetition. She didn't expect a response. But behind her as she walked away, there was a sound, just the faintest huff, not a bark, not a whine, just breath, exhaled into the space she'd left behind. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where even time seemed to move more gently. Outside, the wind curled around the corners of the rehabilitation center, humming low through the fencing. Inside, the kennels were still. Most dogs dozed, their routines unbroken. But in Kennel 19, something invisible shifted. Argo stood at the edge of his space again, just a foot from Mara. No trembling, no pacing, just a stillness that felt heavier than movement. Mara sat as she always did, calm, grounded, open. one hand resting softly on her knee, the other palm turned upward, extended, but not offered. An invitation, not a demand. No words passed between them. None were needed. Then it happened. Without warning, without sound. He leaned in, not fast, not hesitant, just deliberate. His massive head, so long shielded behind suspicion and scars, lowered slowly, closer, closer, until it hovered inches above her open hand, and then contact. The weight of his head pressed gently into her palm. Solid, warm, real. It wasn't a nudge, not a test, not a flinch. It was surrender. Mara didn't move, not even to breathe too deeply. She let her hand cradle the side of his face, thumb resting near his ear, the pads of her fingers against his jaw. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her touch remained steady, silent reassurance that this too could be safe. Argo didn't pull away. His eyes closed halfway, not all the way, not yet, but enough to say, "This doesn't hurt." And that alone undid her. She blinked rapidly, trying to keep her tears from spilling onto the moment like rain on fragile ink. This was not the touch of ownership, not the touch of training or dominance. This was a beginning, one where no leash was needed, no command given, only trust quiet and earned. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. But for Argo, it was the first time in his life that touch didn't mean pain. Not a collar yanked, not a blow to the ribs, not pressure, not correction, not threat, just contact and stillness. When he pulled back, it wasn't a retreat, it was a pause, a breath between verses of a new language they were building, syllable by syllable. He looked at her once more. This time, not with suspicion, not even quite with hope, but with something adjacent, something like curiosity. Mara let her hand rest in her lap again, fingers curling softly as if preserving the memory of him there. She exhaled for the first time in minutes. It came out shaky, but steady enough to hold. Her whisper came only after he turned away, back to the corner, back to his rhythm. "You did good, Argo." Just 5 words, but in that moment they felt like a vow. That evening, Michael passed her in the hallway on her way out. "Another quiet shift?" he asked, one brow raised. Mara looked down at her palm, still tingling. She smiled. "No," she said softly. "Not quiet. Just sacred." Mara didn't expect much when she rounded the corner that morning, coffee in hand, routine and rhythm. Her boots clicked quietly against the concrete, the same way they had for nearly 2 weeks now. But something was different. Kennel 19 wasn't still. Argo wasn't in the far corner, wasn't curled into the shadows like a wound trying not to breathe. He was waiting, sitting, upright, alert. His body still held tension, ears pricked, legs taut, eyes fixed on her. But he was at the front of the kennel, just behind the mesh gate, like a soldier at the ready, but this time not for threat, for presence. Mara stopped mid-step. Their eyes met through the bars. Not by accident, not by passing glance, by intention. She didn't speak, didn't reach, just knelt slowly, knees brushing the cold floor, and offered him her quiet. Argo didn't move, didn't retreat, didn't need to, because for the first time, he'd already moved forward. That was the miracle. Michael noticed it first. He stood behind the glass partition outside the kennel hallway, clipboard in hand, talking to a volunteer about scheduling. But his eyes kept drifting, again and again. Finally, he cut the conversation short. "Sorry, give me a second." He stepped into the hall, peered toward Kennel 19, and just stared. "He's sitting at the gate?" It wasn't just posture. It was posture waiting for someone. For her. By lunch, 3 more staff had passed by, each slowing their steps as they approached Mara's post. "Since when does he come to the door? I thought he didn't even lift his head." And Mara would offer the same answer every time. "Today." Inside the kennel, Argo's breathing was calmer now. Still fast when someone walked by, but not frantic, not laced with panic. When a metal bowl clanged 2 enclosures down, he didn't bolt. He just blinked. And when Mara murmured, "Hey, buddy," from her usual spot outside the gate, he didn't recoil. Instead, he shifted closer. The space between them no longer a chasm, but a choice. One he made. Later that afternoon, a newer staffer, Rebecca, approached Mara during rotation. "He used to growl at everyone. You should have seen his intake form." She hesitated, then added, "We thought he was a lost cause." Mara didn't flinch. She looked into the kennel where Argo now lay, not in the corner, but halfway between his bed and the front gate, not hiding. "He was never lost," she said quietly, "just waiting for someone who wouldn't stop sitting." That night, after the center dimmed its lights and most of the volunteers had gone, Mara lingered a few minutes longer than usual. She stood up slowly, knees stiff from hours of crouching on concrete. Argo was still watching, still upright, still there. Mara pressed her hand flat against the mesh of the kennel, not reaching, just anchoring. "I'll be back," she whispered. "You can keep the front." He didn't move, didn't need to, because she had already seen the truth. He wasn't behind the gate anymore, not really. It was early, before the sun reached the windows, before the chatter of food prep or the clang of kennel doors. A kind of hush hung over the hallway like a held breath. Mara walked the corridor as she always did, but this morning she carried a different kind of key. She paused at Kennel 19. Argo was already awake, eyes tracking her, not with alarm but with a strange stillness. Not the kind born of fear, the kind born of readiness. She crouched low, heart steady, not racing. And with slow, deliberate hands, she unclipped the latch. The door gave a soft click, swung open just a crack. Silence. Argo didn't bolt, didn't freeze, didn't press himself to the walls like he had on day 1. He just looked at her. No command, no coaxing, just Mara and the open space between them. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. Then Argo's paw moved, then the next. He stepped forward, measured, silent, and crossed the line that once felt like a wall, through the gate, into the hall, into her breath. And then he did something that made the entire world stop. He leaned, not in fear, not in tension. He leaned, his weight soft, trembling, real against her chest. Right there in the corridor, with concrete beneath and chill in the air, Mara held still. She didn't speak, didn't breathe too loud. Just let him surrender. Quiet. Total. Her hand hovered in the space between them. Hesitant. A prayer in motion. Then slowly, gently, she let her palm rest on his back. He didn't flinch. The world narrowed. No barking, no footsteps. Just this. A soul that had lived in hiding now resting in her arms, not as a soldier, not as a project, not even as a dog, but as a being who had finally found safe. From down the hall, Michael had paused at the far doorway. He didn't interrupt, just watched from the shadows. Rebecca joined seconds later. Her clipboard slipped to her side, forgotten. "He walked through?" she whispered. Michael nodded, voice low, "On his own." They watched as Argo slowly exhaled, shoulders dropping ever so slightly under Mara's steady hand. "We should cancel the evaluation next week," Rebecca said. Michael nodded. "Yeah, he just passed the one that mattered." Mara didn't cry. Not then. Her eyes held the moment too carefully to let it spill. But she whispered something barely audible against his fur. "You came back." And somewhere deep in the soft shudder of his breath, she felt the reply. "I never left. I just needed the gate to open." The air still held the weight of night, cool and quiet, when Mara stepped out into the yard. Mist hung low over the grass, softening the edges of the world. She held the leash in one hand, loose, unforced, not a tool, not a test, just an offering. Beside her, Argo stood at the threshold of the open door. His body was alert, not rigid, ears lifted slightly, nose twitching. The leash clipped gently to his collar minutes earlier. No resistance, no protest, just silent allowance. Now came the harder part, leaving the safety of the known. "Just the yard," Mara whispered, more to the morning than to him. "We'll go as slow as you need." She didn't tug, she didn't coax. She just waited. And after a long minute, Argo stepped onto the dew-kissed grass shoulder, brushing her knee like an anchor line he wasn't ready to cut. The world outside the kennel was full of noise most people never noticed. A bird call, sharp and sudden, the rustle of leaves in the far corner, a garbage truck's distant exhale like a memory with teeth. At each sound, Argo paused, legs stiff, breath held. But Mara didn't urge him forward. She just stopped, too still as stone, steady as breath. They walked like that. One slow step, then stillness, then another. A pilgrimage, not a stroll. Mara let the leash hang between them, not as a boundary, but a thread, something light enough to let go if he needed to, but strong enough to remind him he wasn't alone. They passed the side wall where the ivy grew thick and low. The ground here held a slight slope, and Argo slowed even more, head down, scanning every inch like a minefield. And yet he walked. Every few steps, his body checked the sky. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked to Mara. But when they met hers, he didn't bolt. Something in her gaze told him, "You don't have to be brave. You just have to be here." 20 minutes passed, and they'd barely gone 100 feet. But to Mara, they'd crossed an ocean. Not once did she think of the clock. Not once did she think of progress charts or program milestones or what the staff might say when they saw her return with muddy shoes and nothing to show for it but the quiet memory of a dog learning to trust the earth again. Because when they turned back and Argo stayed by her side, that was everything. The sun finally broke over the trees, bleeding light into the field around them. Argo stopped in its warmth. He lifted his nose toward the sky, blinking against the gold. And for a breathless second, he stood tall, like something inside him remembered what it was to be more than broken. A dog, yes, but also a survivor, a soldier, a soul. Mara's eyes welled, but she blinked fast and looked away. She didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening in that quiet moment between fur and sunrise. Instead, she whispered, "Come on, partner." The word was old. It came from another life, tucked in the folds of her voice. But Argo didn't flinch. He just stepped forward. And they walked the rest of the way back together. At the gate, Michael was leaning against the fence with a mug in hand. His eyes flicked to the leash, then to the dust on Mara's boots, then, finally, to Argo's posture upright but not tense. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, slow. Mara nodded back. Some milestones don't need applause. They just need someone to see them. Later, when she sat by his kennel, Argo didn't retreat to the corner. He lay near the bars instead, close enough to hear her breathing. And when she rose to go, he stood too. She glanced back one last time and saw him watching. Not with fear, but something softer, maybe even waiting. "Tomorrow," she said gently, "we'll walk a little further." And when the door clicked shut behind her, she smiled to herself in the silence, because now she knew he would be there. The file came by accident. It had slipped between a stack of intake papers, aged, discolored at the corners, with a red wax pencil mark that had long since smeared into a bruise. Mara hadn't been looking for it, but once it was in her hands, something told her not to put it down. Her fingers hovered over the worn folder before opening it. The name on the tab was typed in all caps. Argo, Canine Unit 0427. No last name, no designation like pet or adoptable, just a number and a code. Her chest tightened. She pulled the file open and the first page stopped her breath. A photograph clipped to the upper corner. It showed him younger, sleeker, eyes impossibly bright. No scars, no shadows, no tremor in the posture. The pup in the picture sat alert beside a soldier's boot, chest puffed forward like pride lived behind the ribs. Tongue out slightly, ears standing straight, tail mid-wag, hope incarnate. She blinked, hard. Then she sat. The pages that followed were clinical rows of evaluations, training reports, timestamps, each line heavier than the last. Initial response to scent drills, above average. Tactile sensitivity present but not disqualifying. Signs of early reactivity under stress. Then came the incident reports, multiple. Exhibited freezing behavior when exposed to gunfire playback. Required handler physical restraint during simulated urban breach. Mara's eyes followed the notes down to a highlighted line. Recommended for program termination. Temperament unsuited for field work. Her fingers curled at the edges of the page. Program termination. 2 words. No blood, no drama, just silence, sterile and absolute. She kept reading. There were internal memos, notes not meant for public view. Mild potential for rehabilitation, but cost exceeds unit value. Unlikely candidate for rehoming due to behavioral triggers. File flagged for archive. No further action recommended. Mara stared at the phrase like it had weight. No further action. As if the living, breathing creature sleeping 2 doors down, who now leaned against her chest during morning walks, had once been nothing more than a number fading in a drawer. She turned to the last page. There was another photo taken months after the first. Same dog, same eyes. But this time Argo's ears were down, his body thin, his gaze turned not toward the camera, but away from it. The caption beneath read, "Post-evaluation, Unit 0427, status ineligible." Mara set the file down on her lap. She didn't cry, not exactly, but something inside her folded in on itself, a grief without sound. She reached for the photo of the young Argo again, holding it close as if warmth might bleed from paper. What had they expected from him? That fear would vanish like smoke? That wounds unseen weren't wounds at all? And when he didn't deliver perfection, they had tossed the rest of him aside, potential and pain and all. She stood slowly, walked out to the kennel corridor. The sun had begun to warm the concrete floor, casting long shadows through the bars. Argo lay curled, half asleep, but he lifted his head when he saw her. Not startled, not afraid, just aware, present. She crouched near the gate and slid her fingers through the bars. He leaned forward, brushing his muzzle against them softly. She whispered, "They said you were too much, too broken, too reactive, too expensive to fix." Her voice caught. "They didn't stay to see this part." He rested his weight into her hand, eyes closing briefly as if he too knew what had been lost, and what had now somehow been found again. Mara looked at him, really looked. Not at the scars or the tremors or the shadows behind his gaze, but at the courage, the quiet decision to try again, to trust again, to walk forward when it was so much easier to disappear. She made a silent vow. He would never be a file again. It started with a bang. A metallic crash cracked through the still morning air, sharp, jarring, unnatural. Somewhere behind the adoption wing, a contractor had dropped a length of rebar. It echoed off the cinder block walls like a gunshot. And in an instant, Argo disappeared. Not his body, he was still there, leash in Mara's hand, paws on the shelter lawn. But something behind his eyes vacated, his legs locked, muscles seized. Then came the spiral. His teeth sank into the leash. Not in aggression, but panic. The kind of panic that comes from a place deeper than memory, where logic no longer lives. He thrashed, claws gouging the grass, backpedaling wildly like the world behind him was on fire. "Argo, hey, it's okay, it's okay." Mara dropped to her knees, slow and steady, just like the protocol for trauma dogs advised. But this wasn't textbook fear. This was war replaying itself. Argo was gone, pulled under, caught in the undertow of something he'd never learned to name, only endure. He bucked again, eyes wide, saliva flecking from his jaws. The leash burned across Mara's palm, but she held it, not to restrain, but to stay connected. "I'm right here," she whispered, barely audible over the hammering in her chest. "You're not alone." And then she let go. Not of the leash, but of her voice, her expectation, her timeline. She did the only thing she could. She became still. She sat cross-legged just a few feet away and opened her arms, not in invitation but in surrender. "You can come to me or not. I'll be here either way." Argo circled, trembling, pacing, confused by freedom he didn't want. He wasn't trying to run. He was trying to find the war in the silence. It took minutes, long, aching minutes. The kind that feel like you're holding your breath inside your bones. But then he saw her. Not just a shape or scent, but her. His eyes met hers. Not fully, not for long, but enough. Enough to remember the one person who had never forced him, never failed him. He collapsed, not in exhaustion, but into her. All 70 pounds of him pressed against her chest with a thud that nearly knocked her over. His head dug into her ribs, eyes shut so tight they quivered, He wasn't breathing right, shallow, sharp gasps like the world still hadn't let go of him. Mara didn't speak. She simply wrapped her arms around his trembling form, one hand on the back of his neck, the other bracing his flank. Her pulse slowed deliberately. She breathed as if for both of them. "You're not there anymore. You're here. With me." The groundskeeper came around the corner, confused by the dropped tool. A staff member started to approach, but Mara raised a hand, still cradling Argo with the other. "Give us a moment," she said gently. They backed away, and she held him. He shook in waves, full-body quakes, silent sobs without tears. It was the kind of trembling that doesn't come from cold, but from memory, from being taught that the world explodes without warning and love can vanish with the sound of a latch. Mara didn't try to stop the shaking. She just became the shore he could crash into. Eventually, his breath slowed. His paws stopped digging into the soil. His jaw unclenched around the leash, which now hung like a quiet thread between them. He leaned his head up, nose brushing her collarbone. "Good boy," she murmured, voice breaking. He didn't flinch at the words. Not this time. When they finally moved, it wasn't dramatic. He simply stood, pressed his side against hers, and stayed like that while she rose. His leash dragged gently between them, not taut, not tense, just a connection now, not control, not power, just a choice. They walked back to the kennel slowly. No commands, no corrections, just a rhythm. Step, pause, breathe. Later, in the notes she wrote that evening, Mara didn't call it an incident. She didn't use the word outburst. She didn't say aggression or failure. She wrote one sentence. Today, Argo remembered something awful and chose to come back. She paused, then added, "That is courage." And she underlined it once, gently. The first click was deliberate. A soft, almost hesitant tap of metal against metal, barely louder than a pencil falling onto carpet. Mara waited, watched, breathed. Argo's ears flicked back. His body stilled, but he didn't flinch, didn't bolt, not like before. It was the first step of many. Each afternoon now, after the sun began to slant through the west-facing windows of the rehab wing, Mara pulled the curtains just halfway and dimmed the lights. The room remained quiet, cool, private, their space. She never called it training, because this wasn't about obedience. This was about rewiring something inside him that had been fused in trauma. A war that had never ended. A nervous system always waiting for the next impact. So they started with sound. The tap of a spoon on wood. The crinkle of foil from across the room. The shuffle of boots, but only recorded ones. Never real footsteps. Each sound played low on her phone, volume barely above a whisper. A world he once survived, now reduced to controlled echoes, measured, predictable, chosen. Each time he twitched or braced, she waited. And when he stayed grounded, when he didn't flee, she clicked the clicker softly and dropped a small morsel into her open palm. No commands, no good boy, just a shared glance, just trust layered over silence. Some days progress was a second of stillness. Other days, nothing worked. He'd retreat, curl into himself. Breathe too fast. Mara never scolded, never rushed. She'd slide down the wall and sit beside him, legs outstretched, her voice low as a lullaby. "We're not going fast," she'd whisper, hand resting near but never on. "We're going forward." It became a refrain, a promise, a tether. Touch therapy came next. Not affection, not petting, not yet. It began with her placing objects near him, a glove, a towel, a brush, not to use, just to exist in his space, to let him see that contact didn't have to mean force. Then came cue touch, the gentle press of 2 fingers behind his shoulder, a pause, then a treat. Repeat. Every step was opt-in. She waited for eye contact before beginning. If he walked away, she didn't follow. If he leaned in, she held still. And over time measured in heartbeats, not clocks. He began to associate her touch not with demand, but with permission. "This is yours," she'd murmur. "You can take it or leave it." Most days he took it, not eagerly, not yet, but with trust blooming like moss in darkness, quiet, stubborn, alive. By the 3rd week, Argo could lie beside her while a car door slammed outside. Not always, not perfectly, but sometimes. And that mattered, because healing, she knew, was not linear. It wasn't clean. It was full of backslides and pauses and days where the only progress was not giving up. And Argo had not given up. Neither had she. One day, during a session with the broom, a dreaded shape that once meant cages and shouting, he startled just slightly when it tilted against the wall. His hackles didn't rise. He didn't retreat. Instead, he looked at her and stayed. Mara didn't praise him with words. She simply whispered, more to herself than to him, "Look at you." She placed a small treat near his paw. He took it, didn't drop it, didn't freeze, just ate. And then, as if he understood what they'd both just witnessed, Argo did something he had never done during any session. He exhaled deeply, audibly. A breath let go from a part of him that had been clenched too long. Back in her journal that night, Mara wrote, "The shadows are thinning," and beneath it, she underlined the same word she'd whispered every day. "We're not going fast. We're going forward." It started with the jingle of the front doorbell. Mara looked up as a family stepped in. 2 parents and a boy, maybe 10, holding a pamphlet and a coiled leash like a dream, finally close enough to touch. They looked kind, but Mara's gut tensed. She didn't smile. Instead, she stepped forward, not blocking the hallway to Argo's room, but guarding it. The mother smiled. "We're here about the German Shepherd." "Argo?" The boy lifted the pamphlet, Argo's photo from intake, before trust softened his eyes. Mara kept her voice steady. "He's still under assessment." The father's tone was warm. "No rush, just hoping to meet him." The boy leaned, trying to see down the hall. Mara hesitated, then nodded. Just a few minutes. In the visitation room, Argo was already pacing low tail, half-back ears. He noticed them before they entered. Mara knelt beside him. "It's okay. I'm here." The boy entered first, crouching, gently laying the leash on the floor. The parents followed, calm, slow. Argo backed up until his side touched Mara's leg. Not trembling, not growling, just pressed close, choosing her. They tried. The mother offered treats. The father asked questions. The boy said nothing, just waited. But Argo didn't budge. After 10 minutes, the father smiled. "Maybe. Not yet." "No rush," the mother said softly. The boy nodded, understanding without words. They left, and when the door clicked shut, Argo finally exhaled. then leaned into Mara's leg fully. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because this wasn't about ownership. It was about belonging. The shelter was quiet beneath a low, heavy sky. A storm brewed in the distance. Mara sat at her desk, laptop dark. Argo lay curled outside her door like always now. But the question weighed heavier than before. Was she helping him heal, or had she just become another soft thing he couldn't survive without? There had been another dog once. Rowan. Same haunted eyes, same hesitations. She gave him everything. But love wasn't always enough. He never recovered. And Mara never stopped wondering if she'd held too tightly. A gust of wind stirred. Argo flicked an ear but didn't rise. What if he was only okay because she was here? What if healing wasn't real, just dependency? Would he collapse if she disappeared? She moved to him, crouched beside him. His amber eyes met hers, softly. Am I helping you? Or holding you? She stood. I won't decide for you anymore. She left the door ajar. Argo didn't follow, didn't panic. Just watched. Morning arrived, wrapped in mist. Mara unlocked Argo's kennel gate open, hands still. No words. No leash. Argo lay with head on paws. He looked at her, then at the open gate, and rose slowly. One step, then another, thoughtful, awake. He passed her, brushing her knee lightly, not clinging, just choosing. He stepped into the open yard. The sun was rising through the fog. Mara didn't speak, didn't reach, didn't lead. She followed a few steps behind. Together they moved into the light. No leash, no command, just choice. The first time Mara opened the car door, Argo didn't move. He stared at the open space like it might swallow him whole. His breath came quick. To him, the outside world wasn't freedom. It was noise, traps, uncertainty. But Mara didn't coax. She just sat in the front seat, door open, voice soft. We don't have to go far, just the park. You'll be with me. Minutes passed. Then Argo stepped forward, slowly, carefully. He didn't leap. He climbed, inch by inch, trembling. But he got in. That was enough. The city park was quiet. Mist clung to trees. Sidewalks glistened from earlier rain. A toddler laughed somewhere behind a fence. Argo took it all in, head swiveling at every sound. A bark, a car, a squirrel. But each time, Mara's voice anchored him. It's okay. You don't have to fix anything. Just be. She didn't tighten the leash. She let it hang. A bridge of trust. A man in a red hoodie passed too close. Argo flinched, dropped low. His eyes went far away. Mara crouched beside him, said nothing, just offered her hand. After a moment, he pressed into it, exhaled. They stayed 20 minutes. One slow loop around the edge. When they returned, Argo got in faster, still watchful, but not frozen. At the center, he didn't bolt from the car. He waited for her to exit first. A small thing, but healing often is. That night, as he curled near his blanket, Mara whispered, "You went outside the fence today," and smiled. Not because it was done, because they'd begun. The boy hadn't spoken in 11 months. Theo, 6 years old, sat cross-legged on the therapy mat, eyes tracing the carpet. No word since the fire. Mara stood by the door. Argo padded in behind her. No leash, no command, just presence. Theo didn't look up. Argo didn't push. He circled once, then sank to the floor beside him, facing the same direction. Still, like he understood. This wasn't to be fixed. Just joined. Minutes passed. Then Theo's fingers moved, hovered, then touched Argo's side. Barely. But Argo didn't flinch. The boy's hand curled, rested. The room exhaled. Later, in the staff lounge, the therapist said he didn't pull away. Mara nodded. Argo didn't either. They sat in quiet, until the therapist whispered, "He's not just healing, he's helping." That night Mara knelt beside Argo, whispered softly, "You did something good today." His ear flicked, but he didn't rise. Didn't need to. Even heroes need rest, especially the quiet ones. The package came in plain brown paper, no logo, just Mara's name and a return address in looping pen. She opened it in the break room. Inside, a collar. Thick leather, soft-lined, stitched by hand, not tactical, not showy, just made with care. The tag was oval, brushed brass, etched with words that caught the light. Chosen, not broken. She stood there a long while, collar in hand, heart somewhere between ache and awe. Outside, Argo lay curled in his usual spot, half asleep, half listening. Mara walked toward him slowly, not hiding the collar, but not forcing it. She knelt. Argo lifted his head, ears tilted, aware. She held the collar out, open palm, offering. He didn't retreat, didn't flinch, just watched, then leaned forward, pressed his snout softly into her elbow. Mara smiled through shimmered eyes. "Hey, love," she whispered. She lifted the collar, buckled it gently around his neck. Click, final, soft, a sound that said, "This belongs here." She leaned down, pressed her lips to his forehead, a kiss against the old scar above his brow. Argo didn't move, just closed his eyes. Later, when a volunteer asked if it was a new collar, Mara answered without looking up, "No, just finally his." The first thunderclap cracked the sky open like a fault line. It came sudden, no warning in the forecast, no distant roll to prepare the nerves. Just a jagged split of light and a boom so deep it seemed to shake the air inside the building. Mara dropped the towel she was folding. Her first instinct was to run to find him, but she stopped herself. Instead she listened. No barking, no pacing claws across tile, just rain. Heavy, steady rain. Then a soft exhale. She turned the corner slowly, eyes scanning the quiet hallway of the recovery center. And there he was, Argo, standing at the window, his body taut, ears slightly back, eyes fixed on the storm outside. Lightning flared, his shoulders tensed. But he didn't collapse, didn't bolt, didn't dig. He didn't fold into the corner like a wound reopened. He just stood, tense, yes, but grounded. Mara didn't speak, didn't call his name. She simply sank down onto the floor behind him, palms resting quietly on her knees, waiting. For a long moment, all she heard was the rain striking glass, the occasional rumble like a memory crawling out of a hidden place. Then Argo turned, one step, then two, and without needing permission, he came to her, lowered his body down, curled beside her, his head resting gently on the top of her foot, like an anchor finding harbor. Mara didn't move. She only let one hand slide slowly to his neck, fingers brushing the collar, the one that read, "Chosen," not broken. His breathing was slower now, steady. The next thunderclap came, louder this time. It echoed off the walls. Argo's body twitched, but he didn't lift his head, didn't flee. Instead, he shifted closer, pressing his weight into her side. Not out of panic, but presence. Mara blinked away the tears forming in the corners of her eyes. Not sad, not even joyful exactly, just full. She leaned her head back against the wall and whispered the words they had practiced again and again, even when she wasn't sure he understood. "You're safe." Another breath. "You're here." A pause. "And I'm not going anywhere." That was the final test. Not obedience, not tricks, not silence under pressure, but this. The choice to stay, the trust to rest, the courage to be still in a world that had once only taught him to run. And in that storm-lit quiet, with the window flashing and the wind rising in the eaves, Argo closed his eyes and slept. The hallway smelled of old wood and disinfectant. Dust clung to the corners where sunlight no longer reached. The walls were lined with frames, photos faded by time, some curling at the edges, names etched in brass beneath each one, dogs who had passed through these doors and never made it out. Mara moved slowly, each step measured. The rescue center was quiet today, eerily so. Most of the staff were off-site for training. It felt appropriate somehow, like this visit needed silence. She stopped in front of the wall of honor. There were 23 photos now. She knew each of their names by heart. She had whispered some of them into fur as the sedative took hold. Had watched eyes close that never got the chance to unlearn fear. Some came in broken beyond repair, others just too late. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the envelope she'd brought. Inside, 2 photographs. The first, printed on worn matte paper, was Argo's intake photo, taken that day in the isolation wing when no one could approach him. His eyes in the picture were pitch-black voids, his ears flat, fur bristled, teeth half-bared, the raw, unfiltered terror of an animal who knew only betrayal. She held it for a moment, then placed it gently in the far-right slot. A new addition to the wall, the before. The ache in her chest wasn't grief, but something more complicated, like honoring a ghost that still lived. Then, from the same envelope, she pulled out the second photo. This one had been taken last week. No dramatic pose, just Argo, asleep on the sun-warmed concrete outside the recovery center. His mouth slightly open in what might have passed for a dream. A paw curled protectively beneath his muzzle. His fur, though still bearing scars, looked clean, brushed, dignified. His body was relaxed. And his eyes, when he had blinked up at her after the shutter clicked, were not empty. They were open, present. He had let her take that photo without flinching. Mara reached up and slid the second frame into place right beside the first, before and after. Not to erase what he was, but to remind anyone who looked what healing looked like when given the chance. She stood back, taking in the contrast. The transformation wasn't loud. It didn't come with medals or applause, but it was real. She touched the glass gently, whispering to the wall as if the spirits behind it were listening. "He came back," She could almost feel their presence behind her, those who didn't make it, the ones who had paved the way in silence and scars. As if in some intangible way they had cleared the path for Argo to walk. Mara let out a quiet breath, then turned to leave. But before she did, she paused at the door, looked over her shoulder one last time, and in that still corridor with the light slanting through dust and memory she smiled. They would stay there, side by side, the boy he had been, and the one who survived, not broken, not erased, just becoming. The morning was cool, the sky still dusted with the pale gray of mist not yet burned off by the sun. Birds flitted between the wire fencing of the intake yard, chirping like they hadn't seen pain. Mara stood by the gate with a clipboard tucked under her arm, watching as a transport van pulled up. The doors opened, and 3 dogs were gently coaxed out, one limping, one trembling, and one barking at shadows. She didn't move toward them immediately, because someone else already had. Across the gravel path, Argo rose from his shaded corner. No longer the one being shielded from the world, he had become something else. He walked slowly, deliberately. There was a hush that followed him, not of fear, but of presence. His tail didn't wag, but it held a calm curve. His gait bore a quiet certainty. "I've been where you are. I'm not afraid of it anymore." The barking dog tensed. The limping one shrank back. The trembling one simply stared. Argo didn't push. He approached, stopped at a respectful distance, and then, without a sound, lay down. It was the same gesture he had once offered to a silent child, a language without words. One of the dogs whimpered, another inched closer, and then the smallest of them, the one whose body was all bone and bruised memory, took 2 cautious steps forward, nose to nose, a soft sniff. Argo didn't flinch. Instead, he blinked slowly, one of those long, deliberate blinks that seemed to say, "You're not alone." From the observation deck, a young volunteer stood frozen. She had only started 2 days ago, still unsure how to act around the dogs with numbers instead of names. Mara stepped beside her, eyes never leaving Argo. "You see him?" she said quietly. The girl nodded. "Is he staff now?" Mara smiled, soft, tired, and proud. "He's more than that." She let the silence linger a moment, then whispered, "He once sat where they sit." The girl blinked, surprised. "Him?" Mara simply nodded. They watched as Argo stood again, circling once before settling just a few feet away from the new arrivals. A silent sentinel, a promise. He no longer needed to be held. Now he held space for others. As the sun broke through the clouds, a shaft of golden light touched the collar around his neck, the one with the engraving Mara had chosen weeks ago. Chosen, not broken. A phrase not meant to erase the past, but to reclaim it. That afternoon, when the new dogs were brought inside for assessment, Argo returned to the porch near the recovery wing. Not because he was tired, but because this was his post now. Mara leaned down beside him, brushing a hand over his back. His body was relaxed beneath her palm, his breathing even. "You're not here because you were fixed," she murmured. "You're here because you're whole, even with the cracks." He didn't move, but she knew he heard. In the fading light of late afternoon, Argo lifted his head to the distant horizon, and for the first time he didn't look back. In a world that often rushes past quiet pain, stories like Argo's remind us to pause, to see, to listen, to heal. What began as a broken journey for one forgotten German shepherd became a testament to resilience, trust, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. Through Mara's patience and Argo's strength, we are reminded that healing doesn't always come quickly, but it does come with love, with choice, with time. German shepherds, often seen as warriors, protectors, or tools, are more than their training. They are souls capable of deep feeling, memory, and loyalty. Argo's transformation isn't just about recovery, it's about redemption. It's about rewriting what we believe is lost into something worth finding again. Let this story plant something within us, a deeper empathy for those who walk beside us on four legs, often carrying burdens we don't see. Whether through adoption, rescue, or simple kindness, we all have the power to offer second chances to others, and maybe to ourselves. Because in the end, as Argo taught us, being chosen isn't about perfection. It's about being seen, believed in, and loved anyway.